To understand where we are going, we must look back at where we came from. The search for answers begins now.
June 6, 1944. Midnight. The English Channel is a chaotic symphony of wind and freezing waves. Over 150,000 men are crossing these waters, heading toward the lethal walls of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. But as the world watches the massive fleet moving toward the beaches, something else is happening in the shadows. A mission so secret that even the soldiers fighting next to them have no idea. You think you know D-Day. You think you know the heroism of the paratroopers. But today, the Origin Archive opens a file hidden for over 50 years. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, an army of ghost soldiers, rubber tanks, and sonic illusions. Welcome to the Art of War. Who were these ghost soldiers? They were not your typical infantrymen. The US Army did something unprecedented. They went to the elite art schools of New York and Philadelphia. They recruited painters, illustrators, stage designers, and sound engineers. Their weapon was not the rifle. It was the paintbrush and the air compressor. Their battlefield? The human mind. Their goal was simple: to convince the German High Command that a massive force was stationed exactly where it was not. They created entire divisions from thin air. Hundreds of inflatable tanks, made of rubber, were positioned in the French countryside. From a distance, even through the most powerful German binoculars, they looked like a deadly armored threat ready to strike. While the Ghost Army was inflating their tanks on the ground, a stranger operation was taking place in the dark skies. Operation Titanic. Thousands of feet above the ground, hundreds of British planes were dropping what looked like paratroopers. But these were not men. They were Ruperts. Small burlap dolls, filled with sand, but far from harmless. Each Rupert was equipped with firecrackers to simulate the sound of intense gunfire. As they hit the ground, they exploded into a frenzy of sparks and noise. German patrols, terrified by this sudden invasion, spent hours chasing these straw-filled phantoms, while the real Allied forces were silently securing the beaches miles away. But the illusion didn't stop with rubber and sound. They practiced what they called atmosphere. This was pure psychological theater. These artists would put on the uniforms of famous divisions, paint fake insignia on their trucks, and drive in circles through French villages. They would go into local cafes, knowing German spies were listening, and accidentally leak fake information. They acted like high-ranking generals, pretending to be drunk or exhausted, all to plant a seed of doubt in the enemy's mind. They weren't just soldiers. They were method actors playing the most dangerous role of their lives. In the history of warfare, we talk about cannons and jets, but in the archive, we recognize a different power, the power of sound. The 23rd Special Troops didn't just look like an army, they sounded like one. And let's talk about the tech. These weren't your average speakers. They used massive 500-pound speakers mounted on armored half-tracks. These beasts could project sound up to 15 miles away. The 23rd Special Troops had a library of sounds, everything from the clinking of a cook's spoon against a pot to the heavy grinding of a tiger tank's treads. They would mix these sounds in a mobile trailer, creating a sonic landscape so realistic that German commanders would redirect entire regiments to fight. A ghost. This was the birth of electronic warfare. Maintaining this illusion was a lethal gamble. These men operated just a few miles from the front lines, unprotected and vulnerable. If the Germans had realized the truth, a single artillery strike would have turned their rubber empire into smoke. There were moments where the mask almost slipped. Two French civilians once spotted 4 American soldiers lifting a 40-ton Sherman tank. The civilians watched in disbelief as the tank hovered in the air like a balloon. The soldiers, with a wink and a finger to their lips, whispered, "The Americans are very strong." It was a joke, but it carried the weight of 30,000 lives. One of their most daring feats happened during Operation Viersen in March 1945. With only 1,100 men, the Ghost Army had to simulate a force of 30,000 soldiers. They were holding a 75-mile line along the Rhine River. For days, they kept the German army on high alert, drawing fire and attention away from the real crossing point. If the Germans had called their bluff, the 23rd would have been annihilated. But the Germans never did. They fell for the trick, hook, line, and sinker. General George S. Patton himself once remarked that their deception saved at least 30,000 American lives. That's 30,000 people who went home to their families because a group of artists knew how to use a paintbrush and a record player. Every day they lived in a world where truth was a luxury and deception was survival. The Ghost Army was so successful that their existence remained top secret for decades. It wasn't until 1996 that the Pentagon finally declassified their records, revealing that this single unit had participated in over 20 large-scale operations across Europe. Think about that. For over 50 years, these veterans sat at dinner tables, attended reunions, and grew old without ever mentioning the rubber tanks or the giant speakers. They were the unsung architects of victory, masters of a theater where the stakes were life and death. Many of these ghosts went on to become legends in the art world, names like Bill Blass and Ellsworth Kelly, but their greatest masterpiece was never hung in a gallery. It was painted on the battlefield of Normandy. In 2022, the world finally caught up to their bravery when the US Congress awarded them the Congressional Gold Medal. It took nearly 8 decades, but the silence was finally broken. Their families never knew that their sons saved tens of thousands of lives without firing a single shot. Only recently has the world begun to acknowledge their genius. As we close this chapter in the Origin Archive, remember, history is not just made by the loudest cannons, but sometimes by the most clever whispers. The legacy of the 23rd Special Troops reminds us that intelligence and creativity can be the most powerful weapons of all. Next time you look at a photograph of Normandy, look closely at the shadows. You might just see a ghost watching back. Stay curious, keep searching for the origin, and don't forget to subscribe.